okay for, looking at your computer, maybe not great for printing. Number of passes is 1,000. That's not the same as the number of passes that actually rendered out, so I'm going to put 600. So you want to make sure that those are the same. Scale should be at 1. And then once I save it, it will just save the image. What you can also do is, let's say I left that at 1,000. When I save the file, it's going to be rendering it. So you're going to see your computer kind of thinking because it's rendering the image because you've added more passes. If you change the size to something else that's larger than what the viewport is, then it's going to render it. It's going to have to render it out. So just be aware of that. So once I save this, it shouldn't render it again. It should just save it. Then you know it worked because it says image saved successfully. And then I go to my file where I saved it, and there it is. Not bad. So you can see here that the bump map isn't so pixelated. The bump map is softer, it's smoother, because it's actually rendered it instead of what you were seeing before, which is more of a preview. You see the saturation of the texture is different, much more saturated. It's much more true to the material properties that I've changed for this texture, right? So in this texture, if I go to this surface, if I select it, go to the material, you can see here that I've added some reflection, some gloss, so that it has more of a dynamic surface. So if your model is looking very flat, right, your surfaces, they're not very dynamic, that may also mean that you need to modify your material settings, put some reflection on it, and it's going to give you a nicer surface. Because almost any material has some kind of reflection to it. So even if it's a little bit, it will add more realism to your rendering. So all of this, this is looking much more, I guess, realistic, right? Even though this is an abstract object. The rendering is looking much more realistic than what we were seeing in rendered view. Okay. Okay, the next thing, so if we go back to the examples, you can see here, if I open this, you see there's this area here is in focus, and as you move back, right, it gets blurred out. That's because I've added focal blur to my rendering. And again, this is another tool that will make your renderings look more dynamic and more realistic. Because if you imagine when you're taking photos with your camera, even if you have the newer iPhone cameras or any newer smartphone, there's even an option to add depth of field. So depth of field, focal blur, they're very similar in terms of how they work. But essentially meaning that whatever's in focus is going to be sharp and in resolution, and everything else is going to be kind of fade in the background. So even if you imagine with our own eyes how we see things, whatever our eyes are pointing at, right, that's in focus. Everything else becomes faded or blurred in the background. Okay, so I'll show you how to set that up. So first thing is, if you are in parallel view, you will not be able to make that adjustment. Okay, and the other thing is, there are instances where you want this kind of camera view where everything is, what you're looking at is very flat, right? It's not overly stretched out. And depending on the view or the project, or even if you have a specific style of rendering you like, you will want to utilize the parallel, right? The parallel view for certain things. So like the detail views that I was asking for were to have been staged in parallel view. So we'll see. I'll show you what the difference looks like once I switch to perspective. So everything's parallel, meaning all of my vertical lines are parallel. All of my horizontal lines are parallel. There is no vanishing point. If I go to perspective, I have to zoom in, and I set up the same view. You can see the difference, right? There's a vanishing point. You see my the horizon line in the background because my camera view is in one point or in a perspective, right? So there is a difference. So in parallel view, right, you would never see the underside unless you kind of rotate it. But I will never get a flat view. I will never get a truly flattened view. It will always be in perspective. But I can kind of curate it, right, so that my verticals are more straight. So if you're in perspective view, it's really important that you don't really want overly, even that's not bad because I'm in 50. Right now my lens length is 50. If I go to 25, now you can see it's getting stretched, but you should still want to reduce. You want to make sure that your vertical lines are very straight, even if you are in perspective or you change your lens length. Okay. So let's go back to parallel. Oops. I lost my model. Okay, there it is. Okay, so how to use the focal blur. So in parallel view, you don't get that option. So you have to switch to perspective, and now you will see the option to add focal blur. It's the 3 spheres. And so if I go to, let's say this is, what view do I want? Maybe something, I guess I'll just do the same thing. Something like that. You can see here, now that I've rotated it, that I might want to adjust my lighting. It's not as great. That's not because the model is in shadow versus in this direction, the sun is coming at hitting the model in this direction, so the lighting is a bit better. Okay. This is the view that I want, let's say. I go to focal blur. No focal blur, right, is the default, but you want to turn it on. And now you can see that I've turned it on and everything is blurry because it's just the default setting. So if I do focal distance and I select this icon, now I can give it the I can give it the areas I want to be in focus. So for me, for this view, I want maybe this corner to be in focus. So I'm going to use, and we want to make sure your O snaps are on. So I'm going to give it the point. You can give it more than one. Enter. And now you want to reduce the aperture number so that you can see the blurring. I'm putting it here at 20. But now you can see that the edges, I've only the zone that I've given it as the with the values here are in focus, and everything else starts to fade and become blurred. So I believe the lower the